Hey you guys, welcome back. This time we're going to be painting a lake in the mountains. And I know it might look complicated, but don't worry. I'm going to lead you step by step. We're going to use the skills we learned last time. And this time we're going to add some skills to your list as well. We're going to be splattering paint with this white gouache paint. Paint splatter is super fun. We're also going to be adding some white highlights. And with these colored pencils, we're going to be bringing in details in our shading. It looks hard, but it's actually going to be great, you guys. Welcome to Celebration State, where we help Christians to grow in their creativity and in their love for God. We're going to wet almost the top half of the paper and use diluted Viridian to get a nice even color of this green. Your base color can be darker than mine if you want a darker green sky, but no matter what color you choose as the base, we're going to darken it here on the edges and the top. It's going to leave an arch of the base color undarkened, and that's going to be showing the light from the moon that we're going to be painting really quick here by removing the wet paint. But first, we're going to go through and remove wet paint to make our mountains. Now, my mountains, I wanted to just be pretty triangular, and so I'm just coming in at angles and wiping off paint. I wiped off too much there on the top with a clean paper towel and just coming in making those triangles. Yours could have more ridges, be more ruffled like the previous mountains that we made, or you can just make them like mine, whatever you'd prefer. But these mountains are going to stay a pretty clear white. Now we're going to come in with some wet on wet to make a diffused mountain range below these white tall peaks. Now I make the mistake of putting too much water on top to let the mountains diffuse above. You can either pick to follow me in that mistake right here, there it is, or you can choose just not to, and then you won't have to fix it in the next step. But as a general rule of thumb, diffuse the mountains beneath them, not above them. We're going to do another wet on wet technique for our lake. I left the bottom corners dry and you'll see the boundaries of my lake here, but here's our light cerulean blue. And then on the edges, we're coming in a little bit darker with more cerulean on the top corners and on the bottom. And just leaving that area light in the middle. Here's some ultramarine to make it even darker on the top there. Now on your still wet top green sky, we're going to come in and remove wet paint with a dry brush. And here I'm wiping paint off. I am coming in to make clouds with this paintbrush. Now if you want more dramatic clouds, you can always use that previous method with a paper towel. Just make sure the piece is very, very small while you're doing it so you can get these little tiny details that I'm putting in. Now I'm following sort of a spotlight path for where I know the moon is going to go, but I'm trying to make the shape of the cloud sort of uneven and sort of random within that line that I'm making. And that will help to make this sort of puffy cloud image. So we have our two top lines of spotlight, and then here is the cloud coming beneath that. We're going to make another one on the other side. But first I'm putting the moon right in the middle, just a circle, dabbing to get the paint off and just clearing away right there for the moon to go. Now if you were going to wipe anything with a paper towel, the moon would definitely be it. The clouds don't need to be as bright as the moon. The moon is the light source in this picture. So here I'm just making a nice circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's okay. And here are my other clouds I'm coming in with. Now this is going to dry different, but it's okay because we're going to come in and keep on working it. Here it is dry and it looks a lot more diffused, not so vibrant of highlights. So we're coming in with a wet paintbrush and we're just picking up that paint and we're wiping it away with the paper towel to get those highlights. The gouache is going to really help. That white paint is going to really help in the end too. But this is just how we're creating all of the different layers of the clouds. Here I'm fixing that mistake I told you about. If you didn't follow me in that, then you don't have to fix it. But just, do you see all this darker blue color that got diffused up? I don't want that as much. We could get a little bit of that on the mountains, and it's not a problem if it does towards the bottom portion. Now on these bottom corners, I'm going to come in with some diluted Viridian paint and just making the front parts of our landscape the foreground. And here's some ultramarine. I'm coming in to define these mountain ranges a little bit more. Here are the parts of the mountain range that come into the lake right here. And I'm doing this with Viridian paint, just wet paint on dry paper. And I'm coming in and just spreading that all around. Now that it's wet, I'm doing wet on wet technique with making these darker shadows with still Viridian paint. And I'm coming over here making another part of the mountain range coming into the lake, and these sort of taper down into the water. And I am adding to all of them because they're all still wet, so I can still work them. They look shiny if I go at a different angle. Here's some ultramarine coming in to make shadows. And I'm going to continue to work these to get them just right. Here, if I add water on the bottom, it helps them to sort of look like they're diffusing into the water, get some of that reflection going. With a nice light Viridian wash, I'm coming in and darkening the sky everywhere except for those clouds and the moon. And you can see how this is really starting to take shape and look sort of layered and just sort of beautiful, fluffy clouds. For your first time making water, we're going to keep it really simple, and we're just going to be putting these lines in the water of the cerulean. They're not perfect lines. They sort of diffuse into the land and get wider when they touch the land, but they are going all in this horizontal direction. And here I'm coming in and trying to darken them at their centers. Then next, with this light wash of ultramarine, we're coming in and making a mountain ridge that's behind these ones just to give more depth, very light. And then we're taking that same ultramarine and adding more shadows to the already painted cerulean. And you can see I'm just adding shadows on one line of it, not darkening the entire space of it. We're creating depth, we're adding on to what we've already painted with those shadows. Here we're going to darken our mountain ranges, and we are going to start to add trees. Now here they look almost just like little sticks popping up at the top of these hills, but I want to do a close-up and show you how I'm doing them. It's almost like I'm shaking the sides of a cone. So the shaking sideways movement, it starts skinny at the top and then gets wider as I pull it down, and that is how we're making the trees. So you can see I'm going to do the same thing here, darkening this sort of island mountain coming into the lake. Since the paint is still wet, I'm coming in and adding some shadows with ultramarine blue. These ones in the front are going to be the most defined of the hill mountains that are touching the water because they are the closest. And here I'm going to start my tree. Now I'll start my tree same way, sort of this fuzzy cone shape that I'm making. I'm making sure that they also look like they're one piece with the mountain because it's so far away, it's not going to be defined separately, and it gives the illusion that there are many trees in this area, but these just happen to be the ones that are sticking up. And I do this with a scrubbing motion that helps it to sort of blend in with that green mountain that it's sitting on. Since it's still wet, I come in with some burnt umber to add shadows. Now remember, with landscapes, things that are closer get warmer tones, and so that's where this brown is coming from. And it's going to just create this illusion of shadow, and we're going to be doing that right here on this one, just a little bit less because it's a bit further back, and just going in and blending that all up. For the foreground, let's add a fresh coat of Viridian and start to make our first batch of up-close trees. I thought this time around it would be easier for you guys to see a straight line for the tree and then me coming down on this sort of shaking, wobbly cone. So here I go, I slow it down, and it's just this sort of wobbly, try to make it random, I always struggle with that, but you want to make it a little bit uneven, but not so uneven that it's ugly looking, but so that it looks natural and not pretend. And you're just coming all the way down, getting a little bit wider as you go, and then blending it into the ground because we don't have trunks that are visible in this particular painting. Okay, now I'm just making that last tree and then just kind of defining my branches a little bit, getting them looking how I want them. For the last layer of trees, we are going to start with a brown, a burnt umber underpainting, and then Viridian on top. And that is gonna warm up the color without making it look like it's daytime. And so again, just burnt umber with that same technique, that sort of wobbly cone shape that we're making. And coming in after with Viridian to give it that sort of pine sense, but still dark, very defined and warm. These are the things that will help you to create a sense of depth when you are making landscape paintings. I'm even just coming here and dabbing some brown into the Viridian to create shadows, and I'll be defining those more as we go. And as I do the trees on the other side, I give you guys permission to make as many trees as you want to. My only advice would be to make sure that some of the trees in the row before this one still stick out a little bit, and you can still see a bit of the water. You could do fewer trees than I do, which is a total of these 6 dark trees, or you could do more. You could do 7 or 8, depending on what you like the best. This is your painting, so you can take control of it. For the next part, we are going to be going in and ever so lightly adding just a tiny touch of burnt umber to Viridian, and we're going to be shading our clouds. And this is just very, very light because you still want it to look as if they're clouds. And some of these shadows I mess up and I come back and I fix them later. And do it very, very lightly because you still want to make it look like it's floating, it's light. But this is just going to help to create a sense of depth and interest for your sky. Once this is dry, we're going to move into the most exciting part, which is paint splatter. Gouache paint is very similar to watercolor. It is just thicker, so you cannot see through it as much. It's not as translucent. So I'm going to be watering this down just like I would with watercolor. I make mine a little too watery, and so I have to come back with a few more passes of paint splatter after this. If you make yours a very concentrated but still watery mixture, then you may not need to come back and do a second pass. It's just up to you. We're making stars. So I'm holding the brush with one hand, not letting go, don't let it fall down, and I'm tapping this wet brush. It has white watered down paint. I'm tapping it over the clouds, over the sky. That's why I covered the rest of the painting so the mountains wouldn't look like they had stars shining through them. Here, this gouache is also going to help us to brighten the moon. And we will also go through and begin to add highlights to these clouds, just where the moon would be touching, where it would be shining. Try to imagine beams coming out from the moon. I realize this cloud is above the moon, so the lighting should be the brightest on the bottom. This one has the moon right next to it, a little bit below the moon almost, and so that's why that shading looks like that. But I'm just creating little lines of highlight, and this is going to blend in with the white paper underneath it and create this sort of depth and beautiful layers that clouds should have. But just know that similar to watercolor, this gouache paint will dry a little bit lighter than what it appears right now. This is my third pass of paint splatter for my stars. I really like stars. My sky is so light that all of these stars look pretty subtle, so I'm just adding a nice spray of stars. I'm trying to change how I have my brush also, not just holding it in one direction everywhere it goes, but trying to give it sort of that random spattering, and that's going to give me the effect that I'm wanting. Now after all of that paint splatter, I'm coming in with a wet, clean brush to clean up the clouds one more time. And I'm going to make my second round of highlights in the clouds. I'm making little C shapes, little arches coming out from the moon and just brightening the sides of the clouds to make the shadows do what I want them to do. See how I'm lightening under that top left cloud to fix the lighting. There we go, much better. This is how it is for artists. We are just learning as we go. We're fixing things as we take a step back and look at them and realize things aren't looking exactly how they're meant to look. And so we just take a second look and we fix them. Here comes the fun part, a watercolor light blue pencil. I'm coming in and I'm adding lines to break up the white and also the dark. And these lines come closer together when they're far away, and they get further apart when we come closer to the foreground of the painting. This is going to give the illusion of depth as well. So yeah, I'm just making all these little lines like little ripples in the water. And you notice as I come closer to the foreground, they are further spaced apart. Now with the dark blue pencil, I'm going to start with shading. I'm shading all of the areas in front of my mountain ridges coming into the water as part of the reflection. We'll come in with some green Viridian watercolor paint in just a little bit. But here I'm also darkening those lines that I made in the water. Just the ones in the front. I don't need to darken the ones in the back because those are further away. They don't need to be as defined. Now here, I'm going to be working on these mountains that are in the foreground touching the water, and I wanted to show you how I mix paint. I'm getting as much water on here as I can, just from my water cup, and then I'm dabbing little bits of the paint in and mixing it in, seeing how dark I can get it to become. Here gravity was working against me, so I just tilted it to keep the water on that end away from the more concentrated dab of paint. What I'm going to be mixing in is burnt umber and Viridian, and this is going to make a warm, dark green color that is going to help these ridges seem like they are coming to the foreground. And I'm just mixing it, getting it to this nice dark green color. I forgot to record when I already put a wash of this on these mountains one time already. So you can just know to add an extra wash on here once everything is dry, or just continue to darken it with this wet on wet method. Continue to dab this darker paint into the lower places of these ridges to make it look like shadow. Here I'm coming in with just a little bit of this green color in the water to make it look like these ridges are reflecting in the water. Here we're going to come in and darken these trees a bit more. I also extend the branches out, but you can leave them as they are if you want to. It's totally a matter of preference. I'm coming in with some burnt umber also to give it that shadow coming away from where the moon is, so that inner side of the tree is not getting as dark as the outer sides. And now the next part is fun. We're going to come in with dark green pencil and also some brown pencil. We're going to add some details, some brushy details. These are just lines coming straight down on each sort of branch, each ridge of this tree. And it's just creating a little bit of texture. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but you can if you want to. If you are someone who likes texture like I do, then this can be really fun. Here's the dark brown pencil we're coming in with and just trying to add even more dark shadows. And these light green pencils are only going on the inner edge of these trees where the moon would be touching them. Use that really sparingly because the moonlight doesn't illuminate things completely. For my final details, I'm just coming in and adding little bits of highlights, even more light ridges. All these layers that we've added have blended so nicely, and it's just creating such a beautiful effect. I just wanted it to be just a little bit brighter, a little bit lighter on these highlights. And here I'm adding my last bits of shadow with this mixed Viridian and burnt umber color just on those outer edges of the trees, and that will finish it nicely. If you missed the video where I show how to finish a painting well, how to remove the tape safely, and all of that, click on the link at the top of the screen right now, and I show you ins and outs of what to do and certain problems that you may run into as well. Please let me know in the comments if you ran into any trouble along the way with this painting. I hope that you learned a bunch and you had a blast. If this video series has been blessing you, don't forget to tap that like button and hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications if you want to come on future creative adventures with us. Tag me on Instagram or email me your finished paintings. Thanks so much for watching. Be so blessed.